This podcast contains content that may be disturbing to some audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey!
Hi!
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm obsessed with your background, by the way.
Me too.
You have dolls surrounding you. You have what looks like haunted children behind you. Is that photograph haunted?
You know, when I bought it, the guy who was selling it told me it goes great with haunted objects. So I was like, okay, I'll put it in there. Unprompted, it was just like a random marketplace find. So
That is what
That's cool.
goes great with haunted objects. Yeah, the one in the back, the one in the background looks like she's
With
staring.
the two? Oh.
Yeah, with the portrait. Sorry, well, that doll too. Yeah, but the portrait behind your shoulder. Yeah.
I just really like their expression. But you know what? I get
Mm-hmm.
a ton of comments about them, and I think it's because it's actually a sculptograph, so it's on like metal, and it's like 3D. Yeah.
The doll you have sitting with the black veil looks like the lady from the Winchester, the show. Do you remember how she was walking around her house?
Yeah,
The
so she's
Winchester
actually
mansion.
in like full Victorian mourning. Like the clothes, the actual garments, not the veil, are actual Victorian clothes.
Wow.
Are they
That's cool.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah. You have an amazing collection. It's one of my favorite things to anytime I see you pop up on my social media feed. I'm like, oh, this is going to
know.
be something cool.
Yeah, what's she opening?
Well, I want to live in your house. It's so cool.
That's not the feedback I've been getting this week. Some people
Really?
are very, very offended. And I was like, I'm so
Really?
used to people being receptive of it. So I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I guess like some people think hair is like offensive to own. So
Really? Oh, from the Victorian mourning pieces? But that's art. Like that's intricate.
Right.
That took somebody probably
people don't
hours,
understand.
not
They
days.
think it's like dead people's hair. I mean, they are dead now, but they think it's like taken from corpses. I don't know.
Hair is dead. It's
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean-
it's not even remains. I could go on, but like it's just been like a weird week where I got on the wrong side, and I have thousands of comments that are like, "Why would you do this? Some people just don't care about energy." It's like I do care, or your house needs spiritually cleansed, and I'm like, no, it doesn't. Like I know what I'm doing, and the vibe in my house, like you guys can tell, it's like not a bad vibe. It's more like,
No.
hey, I'm a custodian, and you guys are. I respect everything that's here. You know.
I was just going to say, you grew up in an antique. Your parents they owned an antique store, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's where the deviation comes from is they collected in an era where depression glass and crockpots were the popular thing. And then I'm like, but there's a different side of history. So I get into it. And, you know, I am shocked at the controversy because it's so normalized to me to go into someone's home after they passed away. It's a practice that has been going on. And once I explain it to people, they're like, oh, I'm like, I don't collect serial killer things. I don't collect skeletons. I don't collect wet specimens of prepared human remains. The one thing, well, I have a few things that are like a little bit darker, but one of them, it's a hair chain made in 1896 of someone's hair from the wife of the man that he killed. But the caveat is, how would he get that hair unless she was sending it to him? So obviously she was comfortable with how his demise was. And I think it might have been an abusive situation because when I looked into it, there's a handwritten note from the grandson's wife. So that was the last person in the lineage that had anything to do with this man. And she documented everything. Bless her. She was like, this is William Renfro hair chain. And when I did the research, he was holding a knife to his own daughter's throat when he was shot.
Gosh.
So I think it was an abusive
gosh.
situation. And so as like a thank you while he was in prison, here's something to do. Here's my hair. So to me, I don't feel any bad vibes from it. I feel like it was kind of like a gesture. They didn't end up together. It wasn't an affair. It wasn't a scandal. It was just one of those things.
I've always found at least from observing your interactions with the things that you collect, to be incredibly respectful, but also educational, because I love history. I love haunted history, but I feel like your work, specifically your collections, sheds light on traditions that we don't know and understand anymore. And without people like you preserving that, like, it would be gone and we wouldn't know it anymore. So what's that like for you? Because you're a very large creator. You do a lot in the paranormal, but what's that like for you to be on the other side and be getting the negative attention instead of the more welcoming community that we're kind of used to?
Sometimes it's hard to be misunderstood, and it's dismissive when people tell me to ignore the people who are leaving comments like that, because I know why I do what I do. And in my heart, I know it's not because I want attention on me. Most of the time, I don't show my face. I don't think it's because I'm quirky. I don't think it's like creepy. I don't think it's decor. I think that it's a historic collection that other people can appreciate. And even though that I don't have a museum front, it's something that people should still see. And maybe someday that will be the direction it heads. And when I see someone say, "Oh, you have the hair and teeth of a murdered child," and I say, no, the practice was to cut their hair as they were growing into an adult because it was a rite of passage, just like I believe death is a rite of passage. And they kept his teeth. They're just his baby teeth. And then they say, oh, well, then it deserves to be buried with him. How are we going to find him? Are we going to spend $700 to DNA test every single object to hopefully find a grave that may or may not exist, be documented, be on a homestead? Like, it is not practical. And it's indicative and representative of an art of an era. So for me, yeah, it's not because I think it's a personality quirk. I do obviously dramatize it. And I think that's where people get a little bit lost on the cause, because they're like, oh, you're posting it. I'm like, well, you kind of have to know how to post on social media and get in the groove of the algorithm for people to see it. If I just, put on some, background jazz or like piano music and show the objects and slow pan, that's not relatable for a new audience. So I kind of have to navigate it. I'm always respectful. One of the last ones I got with this video I posted, I bought these objects on eBay. It's one of the most nationally recognized platforms. Everyone knows what it is. And a lot of people said, no, you didn't. And then so I posted all the listings, but a lot of people said, you good. And I'm like, I know that in other countries, that's kind of like a what's up kind of thing. But I have just said, are you good? Like, why is this so uncomfortable for you? Especially, I have a light fixture from Waverly Hills, and that's one that's like shocked people. I'm like, it's just the globe that covered a light. It's nothing creepy or intense. It just happened to exist.
Well, and I think part of the fun with paranormal is the history, or I don't know, sometimes it's not always fun, but the history of the paranormal and how we learn about the people that lived in the past is the biggest part for me. That's the funnest part for me. So I think that you're collecting these objects and learning about the history of the people is pretty cool. Can you tell us about your haunted dolls?
Yeah. So I had a huge aversion to haunted dolls for the longest time because I think it is misrepresented on social media, because a lot of people have dolls that came from someone who only obtained information from a spirit box, which I don't think, it's a business. These are people who turn on the spirit box on a doll that they found and they put a story to it. I think we can get great evidence from a spirit box. However, spirit box evidence alone is not evidence. It needs to be layered. There needs to be more to it. So what they're doing is taking any response and then they're like, okay, let's string these together and make this story. That being said, I had the first set of haunted dolls in my collection that were sent recently came from the collection of Ryan Matthew Cohen, who was on the show Oddities. Ooh. He has a pretty well-known collection of just macabre things in general, things that you wouldn't even believe, things that are, I would consider ancient, thousands of years old, some of these things, and it's staggering being in the house being in it, you would feel like it would potentially be haunted. So when I went a year ago, I asked, is your house haunted? And he said, no, they've never had an experience. They're open to it, but they were skeptic and they hadn't had anything happen until this year. So in November of last year, they had these two Dapper Dan dolls that had the pull string on the back. They're ventriloquist dummies.
Cool.
And they bought them from a collection at a market. The market got them from someone who had essentially a hoard of them. He was collecting a ton of these dolls, and they came from this estate. And when Ryan bought them, they told them, be careful with these. You need to make sure you have space for them. And so he brought them home. He sold off 9 of them and kept 2.
Oh.
When he was doing a photo session of these dolls, he was joking around saying, I don't know why they said to be careful with them. These are just dolls. This is silly. And he continued with the photo session, but when he put them back, both of their mouths fell out at the same time, which is like the most creepy vision. And I was like, oh no, here it goes. And he said, and his words were, all hell broke loose after the mouths fell out. And he said that they were like shifting out of place. He had to secure them. He collects antique hands. So they're like model hands carved out of wood and other material. And one of the pairs of hands fell down, crashed into one of their heads, and broke it. The heat in the property that he rents behind his house, it went out, and they had to pay thousands of dollars to fix it. They had a business relationship kind of sever overnight, and they weren't able to, like, you know, not on anything on their end. It was just like, hey, we're not running this business anymore. So you've got business troubles, you've got, you know, mechanical troubles. And he said, you know, one thing could be a coincidence, but the dolls are moving. They're hearing people walk around to the house to the point where they're sending people upstairs to check. So Regina would say, Ryan, go upstairs. There's definitely someone in our house. Go look. And twice it was not them. People are coming over and they feel like they need to apologize to the dolls. They're bringing, you know, coming over to do hair and bringing them offerings. There was just this immediate feeling that there's a presence. And Ryan said he wanted to keep them still, because I kind of laughed. I'm like, haha, you had your experience. And he goes, no, it's been ghastly. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I thought it was like a fun ghost thing. And he's like, no, it's terrible. So I said, set some boundaries, apologize, and everything's going to, you know, kind of subside. Well, it was fine for about a month. He takes them out for another photo shoot for his new book coming out, which is called The Witch's Door. And that's to be released in October. He had a chapter on the book, on the dolls at this point, because of all the experiences they had that had now stopped. The photographer feels like he needs to ask permission. He doesn't know why. He just immediately has this feeling. And he's like, I just feel like I should do this. They photograph them for the book and put them back, and things pick back up. So I don't know if it's with the photography or if he had done something at this point. He hosts the Oddities flea market events that are all over the country. So he had one in Brooklyn, and it was in New York. And he drives down from Connecticut in his car. He's the host of the event. His car breaks down, and he has to be jumped outside the venue, which I would be mortified. Like, all these people that came to your event, you're the host, and you're getting your car jumped outside. So that was not good. He goes home and he has some engagement that he has to go to in New Jersey. So they take Regina's car, which has 18,000 miles, and they're driving. And I guess the car kind of started smoking and they had to get off the road. Something was physically disconnected in the car, he said afterwards. This is weeks later. He said it wasn't just like a random car thing. This is a new car. He had to Uber from New Jersey to Connecticut, which insanely expensive. Yeah. He sends me a message at midnight and said, the dolls need to go. Emergency situation. Just get them out of my house. And I said, hey, everything's going to be okay. Here's what I think's going on. And he's like, I'll talk to you in the morning. I'm beat. I'm tired. I'm so done with this. So I thought I wouldn't hear from him. You know, like he's super busy. They have all these events. They're writing this book. He calls me at 10 o'clock in the morning, like bright and early. And he's like, what do? Do I light them on fire? I said, Ryan, no, like research, send them to me. And I was really uncomfortable, but I told him if he takes salt and salts the dolls outside his house, he's going to create this barrier, both a physical and mental barrier between them and himself, and to mail them to me. So he dumps like an entire thing of salt. And I said, once they're salted, do not bring them back in the house. He dumps the entire thing of salt and he goes to take them to the post office to mail to me. And his car starts having trouble. The other car starts having trouble. And he's like, I don't think I'm going to make it to the post office. And I was like, schedule a pickup. If they're not mentally connected to them yet, they'll be able to move the dolls at least through the postal system. He got there. He's like, it's done. I said, go home, take an Epsom salt soak, drain that water, release yourself of all of that energy. You are going to be fine. And now it has been 4 months since they arrived to me. When they arrived to me, the salt was leaking out of the box. It was a few days before Christmas. And I was like, this is the first time that I felt like I probably shouldn't have invited this in my home. Like, it was just like a bad vibe. And, since then, he's been fine. I've been respectful. I bought them a case. Everyone saw me do that. And I think the case really was kind of like a sign of respect for them. Mm-hmm. But I set up a Nest camera with these dolls and I'm home alone. My partner's out traveling and I get a notification that a person was seen in the hallway. So I was like, what's that about? And I see this like blip where the light goes out and as it's turning on, the mouth is falling out of the doll. Like it's just like, like it's sticking out its tongue. And I was like, why are they doing this while I'm home alone? Why is this the one time that this happened? So we did like a 2-month check-in and I told Ryan, we did catch them moving. And he's like, really? Did you? And I was like, you didn't see the video? It had like 1 million views. And he was like, I don't look at them. Like, I haven't watched anything you put out. And I was like, well, the dolls have probably 15 million views on all platforms with people, thousands of comments of people having nightmares about them, coming back saying, I can't stop thinking about them, feeling anxiety just from seeing them, feeling uncomfortable. And I understand the power of suggestion. However, I did not suggest to anyone. In fact, I advocate against feeling like maybe you're being affected through the screen because I know that people do that to manipulate people.
Sure.
But a lot of people felt uncomfortable seeing them and now they feel it's almost like through the screen. And as they've watched them, they're like, they seem a lot more comfortable now. They're the only objects that aren't allowed in the other object room. So the room I'm sitting in is where the rest of the objects are. They have their own space in the hallway, in their own case. I've left some of the salt there, kept the box that Ryan mailed them in. Ryan had to reach out to the publisher and add a second chapter on the end of the book about the dolls. It doesn't even get to the point where he sends them to me because there were things that we haven't even discussed. He told me that the time that he had these dolls was the worst, most devastating point of his life. And it was so bad that when he told the publisher that he gave them to me, the publisher said, is Becky going to be okay? They were concerned. Like, that's how convincing. And we're talking about professionals, right? Like, we're talking about the other end. These people have no business getting involved in our lives. So, it's wild to own something that is now going to be the chapter in a book that's probably going to be a pretty big hit. And knowing that firsthand account was so impactful that the publisher was asking about if I was safe. And I asked Ryan as a joke recently, I was like, oh, with the book release party, can the dolls come? And he said, no, like I never even want to see them. He's like, we can talk about them nicely. And this is a huge step for him. That's why I was so convinced, because he has all these ancient things, occult books, artifacts that you wouldn't even believe from all over the world. And for these two composition ventriloquist dummies from the 30s to shake him so bad to the point where he doesn't even want to see him, I'm like, this is compelling. So that's like the major thing in my collection. The second doll that I have sitting next to me, I got him recently, actually. I can show you guys, but he's a little cute. He's vinyl. He's not ominous. It was just one of those situations where the person reached out and she had been taking care of her sister who had cancer, and then her husband unfortunately also had cancer, and she felt like she just didn't want this doll in her house anymore. She was hearing footsteps walking across the living room while she was taking care of her sister, and then they put the doll in the garage outside, but I guess the wall was kind of adjacent to the house. Her daughters didn't want to go anywhere near where the doll was. It had moved positions in the house. They had like all of these feelings about it. And they started hearing scratching on the side of their wall. She is like just completely distraught with what's going on with this doll. So she goes to the neighbor where she found the doll, because she had picked it up from a thrift store, and said, hey, I bought this doll from the thrift store and I'm having all this stuff happen. And they said, oh, this elderly couple that just passed away, their children are taking care of their estate, and they had a haunted doll in the house, and they donated it to that thrift store. And she gave me the name. So I don't take this stuff on face value. I'm like, I need you to give me as much as possible, or else my house would be full of stuff. If you can confirm your story, I'm going to pick this up. She said that in their experience, it was moving in the rocking chair, and at some point they felt an entity get in bed with them, and they were like, something's in the bed with us. And when it left, or the presence left, it left like an impression on the bed. So there's 2 layers to the story, and she immediately sent it to me. I always tell the people there's no guarantee this is going to be content, so I don't really see the prerogative to spend whatever $20-$30 shipping to send these to me. But both of those dolls, I was like, I'm convinced enough to believe that there's something with these, but I don't think it has anything to do with them being creepy dolls. I think it's the circumstance. I think they could have just as easily been a vase or a clock.
Sure. Did they ever try saying, hey, I'm trying to give you a good home, I'm trying to do this favor for you. Can you not break down my car?
with Ryan, he did set the boundaries, and it worked for a month. Okay. I think he had put so much into them. He wasn't able to just push it out of his mind and relax, because he was putting so even if the stuff after the boundaries were set had nothing to do with the dolls, I think that it was past the point of no return for him to move on from the dolls. So it was just kind of, a peace of mind. That's how I see it, where it doesn't matter if anything happens here. It's just a home for wayward objects at this point.
Well, it's great that you can give him a home.
Yeah. Like you're an asylum for lost souls.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I've always been drawn to haunted doll stories. I am definitely a believer, but I'm also a skeptical believer. So kind of like you were saying, I need to hear more of the story. But I especially love the ones that, with the doll that's sitting next to you, that have the common tropes with the footsteps running across the floor or the rocking chair. Basically, if it sounds like it's out of a horror movie, I want all of the details.
Yeah. Yeah. With the footsteps and stuff, it's believable to me, and with Ryan, the misfortune is believable. It's when they start getting into, some of the famous cases where it's so extreme. I can imagine an entity kind of being around or surrounding the doll, not inside, but surrounding the doll. Sure. And then that sort of stuff. It was mild enough and over enough time that I was like, okay, and when they're telling me they're going through so much already, and, on top of that, she runs a cat rescue. I just felt for her,
Yeah, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about, I mean, almost with all of our guests, it's come up, is the idea that grief and trauma seem to be a bit of a doorway for these types of entities, or for more paranormal activity to kind of move in and or ramp up when things are extra stressful. It's like a battery pack.
Yeah.
To go on another subject, the other thing that I love about your content, probably my favorite thing, is where you go and clean up old cemeteries. I used to do that with my uncle. He was our town mortician, and we had quite a few that, we'd go pull weeds and clean up the trash and stuff. I go walk through them quite a bit. And I remember one time there was a teddy bear on one of them that had tipped over. And so I just set it back up. And I distinctly heard, "Thank you." Have you ever had any experiences like that? Or
my first experience was in a cemetery. So I know for a long time our community was like, ghosts don't hang around in cemeteries. There's not spirits in cemeteries, because why would they hang out with their body? And it's like, well, the people mourning at the graveside, any elementals that might be in the woods surrounding, there are so many things that are involved in this, and sitting there watching your loved one lowered into the ground and a part of you dying on that day. Of course, you're going to return to that site. It's not all about the body in the ground. That being said, I think that hasn't really affected them in any way. It's just something that I personally am drawn to doing. I haven't had an experience yet with it. It's just seeing what I saw in the cemetery that I posted about. I posted it, one, because I think it inspired a lot of people to get proactive in their community. But I went to Shockoe Hill Cemetery that's in that video. That is where all of Edgar Allan Poe's like immediate, like first girlfriend, girl that he loved and proposed to, family that he lived with, they're all buried there. So that is the condition where Edgar Allan Poe's immediate loved ones cemetery is in. That's bad. And in addition to that, there was a tragedy where a bunch of 13, 14-year-old girls were killed in a factory accident, a factory explosion. So that's historically significant. It changed the way we view child labor. That is the reason we have the laws we do today. There are, military people, historic people in Richmond that were significant. There's so much history there, and people are throwing actual whole bags of garbage over the wall. So I visited and I said, this can't wait 2 weeks. This can't wait till a cleanup day. There's diapers, there's Dorito bags. And I just feel like almost like an obligation. And how many people were inspired by that? I think the one thing that we see is a lot of people in the paranormal and a lot of people in like the, I guess, like spooky history realm make their platform about them. And that's something that I've tried to avoid. I've tried to avoid like making it all about my face, my appearance. And I want to inspire people to do good. I want people to know that you can use your platform for good, and to still, inherently social media is a little narcissistic. So to show people that our platforms can be shared and we can allow things that are not aesthetic, like cleaning up a cemetery with dirty diapers and bottles of urine. Like not to be disgusting like that, but I wanted to post that because I don't think people would see the reality. I could tell them, but showing the reality, even though it wasn't aesthetic or in line with my normal content. But I think in general, I do have a lot of criticisms for people who, you can enjoy cemeteries without restoring them. You can enjoy cemeteries without having to do that aspect. I understand that. But it feels like a lot of people benefit from telling stories and history, but they're not interested in what they can do to, add longevity to that preservation, add longevity to these cemeteries. And if it's a cleanup day, not just taking D2 and scrubbing the stone, but you can actually just pick some stuff up. Or, one thing I like to do is advocate on areas of history that aren't being talked about. I'm always sharing people's, free lectures and stuff that there's a lot of space. And that's why you'll see me also break out of my aesthetic and just put people in my feed and have like an interview on live and say, hey, look at this person too. So I try to use my platform to inspire people to better the community.
What do you think the fascination is with cemeteries? Like, so many of us just like, I love to just walk through them. I feel like they're peaceful, they're beautiful.
I think more and more it's becoming a bygone art. We're getting granite flat markers. And think about anyone in any funeral you've ever been to. If you've been to funerals, because now we're just seeing urns at the graveside. When I give my lecture, Grief and Ghost Hunting, I talk about the decline of Western funeral practice and how today we have people who leave by the dumpster. They usually die alone, or they were dying on FaceTime, especially with COVID. No one to hold their hand, no one to tell them, it's time to go on. And we just almost treat it as if it's a sanitary disposal. And I hate to be like that, but there are ways to memorialize and care about people without funneling money into corporate funeral homes. And that means like leaving a plate for someone who's not there at your dinner table, or lighting candles. There are other things you can do. But I think because funeral has become so synonymous with business transaction, it's a medical bill in some people's eyes, that we are not seeing what it's like to construct a 3-4 foot marble angel over someone's grave. So when we see these, we're like, oh, like what happened here? Like it had to be very tragic, but that was normalized then. If you had the means to establish that, when they were selling the the furniture at cemeteries back in the late 1800s. They were actually selling the ironworks so we've all seen the patio kind of furniture at the cemetery, like the little iron bench that's painted white with a little table. Mm-hmm. They were selling those in pairs of two, so you could decorate the front of your house to match your cemetery plot. So that's how much they saw it as like a lively place. It was set up like a little living room, and you would just go and you would sit and you would feel comfortable. And we've removed that. It's become a place for legends and lore. And of course, something that it's stained with acid rain and it's missing an arm, it's going to start to look more and more ominous over time. And sure. I think when you tell the stories and you unravel them, it starts to become, interesting. It's a side you're taught not to be like. Some people hold their breath. You're taught not to look or go to the cemetery. Some people drive by a cemetery and hold their breath. So for people to hear, hey, there's a really cool story about this cemetery. There's a hidden secret. That's it. It's this place that holds all these art and secrets. It's one of the few places that look exactly as it did when the ancestors were, laying their loved one to rest. So sometimes when you walk through Mount Auburn in Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's a garden cemetery. It has all of this greenery around you. It has all the trees and the flowers. You're like, wow, this is what it was like to be a Victorian in that moment. So I think you're immersing yourself in a historical museum that looks exactly how it did then. It's not on a pedestal. It's how they saw it. And it's just becoming more and more popular. I think now that we're deconstructing the creepy layer, the layer that we've had hammered into our heads for the past, 3 decades, where it's like, a graveyard to some people is a misty, steamy background in a Scooby-Doo mystery, where it's like, the watercolor depiction of them with it's meant with the moonlight, and it's meant to look that way. But when you see it as a place where it's the only place in the city you can see a fox or deer, and you can have a picnic, you can go running, and it's peaceful, and people don't really bother you in the cemetery because there still is that, sense of reverence that you have to hold.
Mm-hmm. I like what you were talking about preserving tradition, especially the matching benches. I never knew that, but like for us, it's like almost novel at this point, because like you said, there is a certain sort of detachment from death that we have nowadays that's like, meh, when you peel it back and you remember that so many cultures across the world and so many people before us still felt that connection to their loved ones who did pass on. They did tend to their graves, and maybe we're the anomaly. Maybe we're the ones who are so disconnected that now there's a fresh wave of us who are like, wait a second, it's not that creepy though. It's actually kind of beautiful. I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think that people like yourself who are sharing these stories and kind of demystifying graveyard traditions is important work for the future, because it teaches literally anybody who comes across your feed have a chance to experience history from a different lens. And that is a beautiful thing.
As a Western society here in America, we are the most death-denying culture in the world. And that is a known fact. And the reality is other cultures all have different practices. Even within America, we have practices that are not acknowledged. Like, in 1963, Jessica Minford published The American Way of Death. And at that point, she was talking about how much of a business that it had become. And that coincided with the year that JFK was assassinated. So we see this grand, beautiful funeral. At the same time, we're told that funerals, and there's this clashing. This is also the same year the Catholic Church decided we're going to allow cremated remains in the church, and it's not going to be seen as a sin. We'll still host the services. So all of this stuff really started happening in the 60s, and we got so removed from what death was supposed to look like that now we're comfortable saying, okay, let me see a photo to ID for cremation, put them in a black box, and you never think about it again. You might scatter their remains. You might, and there's no right or wrong way. There's absolutely no shame in this. But my point is the memorialization. We're not doing stuff outside of the funeral home, like the handiwork. And I understand that it's almost classist to acknowledge this, because I understand that people work and they don't find time to do these little things like stitching names into a shirt or in the corner of their dress, or, making obviously nothing elaborate like a hair wreath, but some sort of memorial display, a shadow box, anything like that. A lot of our photos are going to be deleted when our phones are gone, and we're not going to have those kind of things. But it was almost cathartic, to take your grief and to make something beautiful from it and appreciate it. And you could take the time, people ask about the memorial lithographs. It gave you a space and a moment to look and think of that person in a way that was reverent. And now, like I said, we're at the point where we want it to be over. What's the quickest way to get this done? Families come to the funeral home and they say, how can we get this over? Where do I sign? Just get it done with. And that's not everyone, but that is customary, and it's well known, like it's accepted. So people understand that that's acceptable behavior. It's fine. And some of the things I saw are, we have the Laotian funerals. So what they'll do is they'll actually tie a white sheet into a rope, and they'll pull the entire casket to the retort and push their family in, and they'll push the button themselves. So there's more involvement in all of these other practices that are not normalized here. And that's where I started looking at the connection of hauntings and funerals, because I'm like, wow, like back then they were like, stay here with us. We want you to be here. We want to remember you. It's okay. And we're not ready to let you go. It's okay, fine if you want to linger. It's fine if you're around. And they wanted it. Then we see the spiritualist movement, and we were like, we're calling to the deceased. We want the deceased to be present with us. It's not until we move into the satanic panic era and we start having these movies come out that we're like, something can and will go wrong if we try to contact. It's not natural. We're going against the Bible. But before then, they were having home funerals. The body wasn't disgusting. That you're not going to get haunted. And I understand that we're not haunted by bodies, right? But there are so many stories of white ladies, gray ladies, all of these spirits, blue lady entities that are born with the loss of a children, so the loss of their children, someone never coming home from war, just being consumed with grief in a way. So there has to be this common thread between grief and the afterlife, and the way that we mourn these people, that I think it could be acknowledged and researched more.
That is fascinating. And you actually said something that got me thinking, and I'd love to ask your opinion on this. So a lot of this trend started around the 1960s, correct? Where like the shift in funerals. Do you think that the way that we as a modern society have deconnected with our emotions has anything to do with the way that we treat our deceased as well? Because I feel like post World War II, there really was a movement of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, denying your emotions, denying grief, denying sadness, and just pushing for normalcy at any means possible. But did we in fact push too far, where now we have such a separation from the people, the deceased, the people that we love? Instead of honoring them, we're just like, well, that's done. Bye.
Yeah, I actually do talk about that a lot. When we enter this post-war society, we were avoidant of the grief at that point. We've seen it all. We've reached this level of immeasurable grief. This is like some of the first times people are experiencing this. When you see World War I, World War II, even the Civil War, it's like so much to process that many people. And at first it is like, can we be done with it? We're seeing it right now in COVID. Like now that it's kind of lifting up, people don't want to think about it anymore. So I do believe that. And I believe we did get to a point where, okay, I often ask groups of people, how many days are you given off work when your spouse or your best friend or someone very, very important to you dies? 3 days, 5 days.
I get 2.
Yeah.
You get 2 days?
2 days.
And if it's the worst thing, the most significant thing that's ever happened
Right.
in your entire life. And you get 2 days. And then guess what happens when you come back after those 2 days? You have to act like nothing's wrong.
Right.
You have to be a professional. We as a society have focused on the capitalist notion that professionalism means stoicism, and we can't express these emotions. So detach, detach, detach. And as a funeral director, we were told, don't ever cry in front of your family. That's the worst thing you can do. And I'm sitting there watching an elderly woman say, see you soon to her husband as I'm about to take him out of her home at midnight. I'm like, I'm going to cry. Like, I'm sorry. Like that, I had tears coming down my eyes, you know? And I think that
gave me chills, actually.
Yeah. And there were multiple moments like that where I'm like, I hurt with them, and I don't want to be this person that exists in this profession and is so far removed from it. I've really considered a lot of this, and I think it's the worst emotion to witness someone experience is sadness. So most people don't want to see it. They don't know what to do. They feel awkward. What should we do if someone's sad? Be present. That's it. And we're so uncomfortable with that. Even on social media, you know, you see someone pour their heart out. Oh, why'd you set the camera up and record this? To show you this is the reality. I don't think people understand what it looks like. It becomes so sanitized. And I hate that. I hate that mourning and grief have been sanitized for nothing other than a business standpoint. We don't have time to do fancy work, which is what it was called in the Victorian era when they were making all of these crafts. They had nothing else to do. So they, you know, they weren't working and they were home and they were doing these things. We don't have time to pick up a hobby like that. It's all about working, more productivity, more, you know, output so we can eventually garner more revenue. And it's kind of unfortunately pushed us to be almost robots. And now we're moving towards AI, and we have influencers that are AI influencers. And I always tell other people who are creating on social media, we're going to be replaced one day. And there's going to be someone that never has to take a break. And there's going to be someone that can crank out the perfect ad in their voice because it's all AI. And that's unfortunate.
So you were a funeral director at one time?
Yeah. So
or are you still?
So I'm a licensed embalmer in 2 different states, in Connecticut and Virginia. I never worked as a full funeral director, so I could, but I chose to stick with the embalming for that exact reason. It is, you know, intense. And especially if you're someone like me who absorbs everything, I still think about, I still remember 4 years ago what something looked like. I just relocated to Virginia. I'm licensed here, and I reached out to a funeral home here. So I'll likely be just embalming during the day and still doing my paranormal stuff. But the capacity which I was embalming during COVID, I was just like, I need a break. I just graduated school. I'm working 9 a.m. until 10 o'clock at night, and I have 2 days off, and I can't make friends. And I just needed to reassess because I didn't sign up for that. Nobody's like, we were taught what pandemic and epidemic and all of these definitions meant, but we weren't told that we'd ever see one. Like, I didn't think I would see one. I'm like, that's something that happened in the 20s, right? You know, 40s, we saw those. And I had to watch everyone say it wasn't happening while we had to build a garage that we had to be converted into a cooler to hold 100 extra people. I watched funerals postponed for 6 months to a year. So we have these people around for a year. I watched funerals postponed because they weren't sure if the spouse was going to pass away as well. I watched entire families. I watched, you know, mothers and their children, pregnant mothers not make it, and their baby also not make it. And it was so much to consume as someone who was not even normalized in the field. So I graduated, and as soon as I graduated, I was in the pandemic. There was no normal time. So I had no gauge for what it was supposed to look like. All I knew is that I couldn't go home when I was scheduled to go home. I was stuck there, you know, and I love the job. I love the field. I have skills that people don't learn in their lifetime, in their career, as far as like reconstruction and stuff goes. And I feel like no matter what I pursue, no matter how big my social media gets, I can do a full cranial reconstruction, and I feel an obligation to utilize those skills.
Sure.
Right.
Around all that sadness and grief and it just has to be taxing on you. I know my uncle was a funeral director and it was hard on him a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But what he did for people really made a difference. And
Yeah.
I think that was what kept him going. And he was really good at his job. So what you do matters, really matters.
Yeah. That's the sad part too, is like you can go and you can be passionate about it and hold yourself in there. But unfortunately, the field fosters an environment where you have to be non-emotional about it. And I, within 2 weeks, experienced something from someone who had been in the field for decades. And they said something that was so callous and crass that it made me worried that that was what I was going to be. And luckily that was an anomaly and the rest of the people I worked with were great, but it was still like, oh no, like I don't want to be that person.
No.
Right.
No.
Right.
So,
oh, sorry. No,
I just wanted to ask. Oh, sorry.
You go.
Go ahead,
No,
Carly.
you go. No, you go.
I was just going to say one thing that I wanted to ask you before we leave real quick is, so Carly and I like to try new experiments when we're paranormal investigating. Tell us about some of the experiments that you've tried, which ones have turned out great, or, which ones you've really thought worked well.
One of the biggest fallacies on my social media is a video that I tried to do where I thought that the person could communicate their appearance to me.
I was
through the spirit box.
Yeah.
And there are multiple reasons why I don't recommend this. Number one, their perception of self and identity might not be the same as it was in life. So even if they did describe it to you. Two, like there's a whole canon of beauty that can't be described. So even if you got the features and the things that they were saying right, it's not going to look like them. And I guess intuitively you could do that. Three, it's going to take hours. Like I kind of compressed this into a small video and I knew that it would interest people because they want to see what a ghost looks like, right? That's our obsession. What's a ghost look like? And so I thought, and the interaction was authentic. Like I do believe, and I'm not a huge spirit box person, but in that moment when it was like the pearls and that's like one of very few times where I've used a spirit box and felt like this makes sense to me. And, afterwards I reflected on it and I'm like, okay, so they could be lying about their appearance. I could not be talking to who I think I'm talking to. It's just it's never going to equate to tangible, useful substance in the field.
And do we look the same? Like, can we change our appearance in the afterlife? Maybe we get to look like whatever we want to look like in the afterlife.
Well, and that's what I thought. And it might be like a cosmic void of like stars and like a black hole. And they're like, yes, I was blonde. Like, and so I just think that was something that didn't. I've tried different things with like the Estes method, which we did in the documentary where we're like, okay, let's try 2 different floors. Let's try things like that. Modifications to see. I like to, test things in almost like I don't believe them. Every time I go in the field, anytime I'm on an investigation, especially with the documentaries, especially if someone's making claims, I try to start from the ground up as if I never believed in ghosts before.
Yep.
I go in and I'm like, this is all lies. And I think a lot of people go, oh, you say there's this. I've had people say, oh, this is where the woman is. I'm like, that's nice, but I'm going to pretend that you didn't say that. And then if I can validate it and it comes up, I'll return to that. But, when people are directed a certain way. So those were things. Oh, something that was really cool. So we were investigating this place called the Black Horse Tavern recently. And it was myself, Amanda Paulson, and a few other investigators in January. And it was the first and last meeting place of the Whiskey Rebellion in Brownsville, Pennsylvania. So whiskey is obviously a unique thing to the site. So the Whiskey Rebellion was where all the poor farmers got together and decided they've already taxed so much and now they want to tax our whiskey. Let's tar and feather the tax collector. Think of the energy that anger would create. Think of what these people are going through. So we go to this basement, which is the original foundation where some of these meetings were held. And we're down there and Amanda Paulson takes this proximity pod that I have. It's a meter, and she's able to connect a piece of a Brillo pad, because we needed a piece of metal to make the link work, to make it attached to a bottle of whiskey. So if you touch the lid to the whiskey bottle, it's going to work. Now, it didn't yield any results in the investigation, but I was like, that was a cool thing. That is how we need to be. We need to be more, why would they grab a REM pod over something that makes sense to them to grab? Why would they gravitate towards this meter? So that was something that was really cool. But what we tried was, and a lot of people tell me they aren't using this style in investigations, but for me, it yields really great results, which is role playing. So putting yourself in their position. At hospitals, don't be the guard in the hallway yelling in the rooms. Go and sit in the room with them. And in this situation, I said, let's be these farmers. So I just said, if they do this, if they took this, they're going to attack something else. And we all get more and more angry, and we build up this energy. And all of a sudden, we have Amanda by the door, and she's under doing the Estes method, and we have the tripwire on the floor, which reads EMF. And we're sitting there and we're being so angry. And I said, I want to see something outside of this equipment. Give me a sign that you're here. Show me something tangible. Could you make a sound? As soon as I say, maybe a knock, you hear this loud knock. The entire tripwire lights up. And then Amanda, who's under, says, there's someone here. I start freaking out. You don't see this. I'm not a YouTube investigator. Like I am the most, somber person. And I look at the directors who are skeptics, and then they film us all the time, and nothing happens to this capacity. I look at Tyler and I was like, Tyler, this doesn't happen. This is so crazy. And, so that's one thing that I held with me. And that whole investigation was so strange, and stuff just kept picking up that was not tangible in equipment. So another thing outside of experimenting that I advocate for people to look at is things that are not measurable. For example, that evening we close a door and we hermetically seal it with a sigil. Then we go for a walk. Amanda and I are alone. We close this creepy basement door that is part of where this all happened, because we had opened it in that moment thinking, let's release the energy. Now let's close it so it's, fine for the owner. This guy walks out in the street and he stands directly in front of us. And I was like, we're going to get stabbed. Like, this is the end of our life. Like, this guy's going to take our life in this moment. And he almost was not present in his body. When you accidentally almost bump into someone, they're like, sorry. No, none of that. He was all business, straightforward, stares through our soul. And he starts to walk past us. I jump off the sidewalk because I didn't want to get stabbed by this man. And as he walks past, he goes, did you shut that door? And Amanda and I were like, excuse me? What did you say? He's like, did you shut that door? And we full body chills, because we had the whole thing that investigation led up to was this door. And then this random man on the street says this to us. So that's the other thing, is starting to notice things that are meant for us that aren't necessarily measured by devices.
I actually was going to ask you about the documentary that you just filmed.
Okay. So I just had a documentary release, what was it, this week, that came out. And that one was filmed actually last year with my partner and I at the Grand Midway. And same thing, we weren't using ghost hunting equipment. We were actually using an 80s tape recorder, and we had some really cool evidence there. It's very slow investigating because I'm very quiet. I don't react that way. So if people are interested in seeing that and seeing the history, what I think is the most important is that really focuses on history. So that one's out. That's on Prime now and available to watch for people. It also kind of gets into the subject of letting these locations, they kind of take these narratives of these people who pass away, and they don't consider what it might be like to hear your story of how you passed being the only thing acknowledged for the rest of your legacy. And if there is something present, that's all they're being exposed to. And then most recently in January, I filmed a documentary that they're finishing it up. They're motivated. The activity that we documented for that, I think I saw that person believe today. I screenshot the face of the person with the camera who's a skeptic. And I was like, Chris, you don't sit there with your mouth wide open like that if you didn't start to believe. That's a little bit of belief on your face. He literally was so excited. So that should be out within the coming months, because Chris had told me recently, it was like, I already have finished it. I'm like, we filmed that like 2 months ago. And he was like, yeah, I'm just really excited. And I've seen clips of it. So that's also going to be a Prime release.
What are the documentaries called if people want to find them?
So the first one is called Historically Haunted Ghosts of the Grand Midway. The first one I filmed was called Historically Haunted Pure Pandemonium. That one, I probably wouldn't recommend watching it. We're still learning. We're still learning to be a cohesive team. So the first one, they invited a bunch of investigators, and there's nothing wrong with the documentary. But if it's your first time and you're on camera like that, it's just a little bit. And so I said to them, hey, like the next time, can we, bring in a little more experience? Let me pick the investigators. Okay, actually, I don't want to sound like a meanie, because that's not the case. The girl there was an actress, one of the ones that they brought in. So they didn't understand how experience plays in the field. And everyone can have an experience, but when you're trying to navigate an investigation, you only have a few hours. Yep. And it was freezing cold on top of that. It's just kind of like, you have to explain the person as they go, like, hey, this is how this equipment works and this is what you're doing. And I do think we had experiences that are not tangible on camera. Like, we heard footsteps like walking around, but nobody reacts. And I was like, we all heard those footsteps, right? And they're like, yeah, we heard them. I'm like, we're supposed to let people know. So I think it was just like that, and then so the next one I bring in Josh, because we work together, and they were like, wow, it's so cool to watch a story unfold. And I was like, yes. So, when this is going the way it's supposed to go. And then the last one, we brought in all kinds of different people, and they're very motivated to keep doing it, but it's a learning process. And when I watched the second one back, not to knock my own progress, I was like, oh, like I didn't react at all. I'm kind of boring to watch, because you don't know. You can be investigating for 10 years, but it's not going to translate the same in the entertainment side of it. So I understand that people respect and watch what I do. But like I said, I'm still learning myself. I'm not an actress. I have no formal acting training. And so when people watch that, they're like, oh, I could tell you weren't acting. And it's like, that's both good and bad, because,
I'm not an actress. I'm an investigator.
I look back at interviews I did. People don't understand either. Like, I was given a platform overnight. I went from being regular, embalmer in Connecticut to being on the news. And I look back at those old interviews. And I'm like, who is that person? Because I was like, hi, I want to go see the haunted location. You could tell I'm so nervous. And now I'm like, even podcasts, like talking to people, I was just so uncomfortable. So watching that back, I was like, okay, we need a little more transition. It's just, too much of me being like, hello, this is what we're doing. I don't care if you're milking cows or cooking, like to be able to present what you're doing to the audience is another layer that does take time. Yeah. And so I'm like, yes, I want to share what I'm doing. But then I look back, I'm like, I'm going to cringe like 3 years from now, because it does take practice. And I'm sure other people have gone through this, but they don't go through what we do, where we start on social media and then get thrown into a production, and it's like, oh, this is awkward.
Overnight,
this is a new feeling.
Hey, before you go running to the finish line, can you stop and explain everything every step of the way? And I'm like, let me just do what I need to do. And sometimes it confuses me too. I did a reading for one of the spirits, and the production company was like, can you say that reading was for Josh? And I was like, no, because I did it with the intent that it was for Martha. So I can't just transpose that information. So explaining that's where I'm saying, like, now they're understanding, but it took, 3 whole documentaries being filmed till you get on that page where you're like, oh, I understand what I'm supposed to do and what my role is.
As our last question here, for anybody looking to get into the paranormal, or just anybody looking into death and the beyond, do you have any advice for someone who's just curious?
I think cemeteries are a good place to start, learning their stories, humanizing it, view it as human. Start looking at it as a rite of passage. I know I say this all the time, but it's my biggest thing that I share with people. Death should be reviewed with reverence, the same way we do graduations, birthdays, marriages. It's something that everyone goes through. And to start exploring it, when you view it that way rather than something scary or something that we should fear, then you're going to have those bad experiences. A lot of people say, oh, aren't you scared of the things that you're experiencing? Like, no, I don't think death is creepy. I think it's just, it's not simply life or absence of life. There's a lot of processes our bodies go. And I understand when I hear death, I'm thinking, okay, so the nervous system, the brain shuts down, it turns all the organs off, those organs turn off, then the cells break down and the cells start imploding. And I think of all these things, and it's a biological process that happens along with the spiritual death that's coinciding, or the spiritual transition rather than death. And I think once you start thinking of it as a rite of passage, and you start broadening your horizon and you start looking at other cultures, that's a good place to start. Read about Jewish funeral rites, read about Hindu, any other funeral. I'm lucky and fortunate enough to be trusted in doing things like the ceremonial dressing of the sari, and being involved in Buddhist funerals, Laotian funerals, and understanding that it doesn't always look like one thing. And then you'll start seeing it the same way any other, practice we have. People celebrate birthdays differently. People practice their death rituals differently.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on and for talking to us. We really appreciate your time.
It's been a pleasure.
If you are not familiar with Becky, where can you be found on social media, just in case?
I am My Bloody Galentine on TikTok and Instagram. I also have a smaller YouTube channel, and a lot of people follow my personal Facebook. That's where you'll see everything as it's happening.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
If you loved what you heard today, please consider leaving us a review. Death Becomes Us is an Emotional Pictures production produced by Sarah Nichols and Alex Eisenstein.